This time it's 5 classic touring bikes of the 70s and 80s. In the 1960s, if somebody said what sort of bike you've got, you usually just said, well, it's a bike. But in the latter part of the 60s and into the 70s, machines did become much more specialised. But perhaps none more so than the touring bike, because increasingly these machines became fitted with gadgets and gizmos you would normally expect to see on a motor car. And while there had been long distance cruisers before, the machines of the 1970s took this to a new height. And so here are 5 amazing touring bikes of the period. The Laverda RGS. Laverda's 3-cylinder range is best known for its Jota sporting machine, but there were many others, including the sporting RGS. Laverda first announced their 3-cylinder bike way back in 1969, and would indeed have a prototype running based on the 750 overhead cam model later that year, but they found that the single overhead cam engine didn't produce very good power. So in 1970 a dual overhead cam version of the prototype was built. Another problem was that the 120 offset crank fitted to the first prototypes had a tendency to fail prematurely. To remedy this, the crank spacings were changed to 180, giving the Laverda a very distinctive sound, if not quite as smooth as the 120. Construction of the first production bikes began in late 72 for the 1973 season, with these first machines featuring twin leading shoe drum brakes and wire wheels. But 1974 would see the first major upgrade, with the introduction of the 3C model. This featured a disc brake at the front, later upgraded to twin discs in later models. 75 would see the introduction of the 3CL, with cast wheels and disc brakes all round. The machine's development would continue with an ever-increasing range of more sporty and powerful bikes. However, in 1981 there would be a slight change of tack, with the introduction of the RGS. This was powered by a revised version of the 120 engine fitted to the latest Jota models, but in the RGS this was rubber mounted to smooth out the vibes. One highly unusual feature was the incorporation of the petrol filler cap into the fairing at the front. The RGS featured an engine of 981cc with a bore and stroke of 75 by 74. Compression ratio was 8.8 to 1 and peak power was a claimed 83.3 horsepower at 8,000 rpm. There was a 5-speed transmission and chain final drive. The bike had a wet weight of 253 kilos or 558 pounds, with that large 22 litre fuel tank filled, and top speed was around 137 miles an hour claimed. But even by that point Laverda were already in financial trouble. As a small company trying to compete against the major Japanese giants, it was really beginning to struggle. And of course as a small company lacked the economies of scale, so they simply couldn't cost compete with the Japanese. As a result, just over 7,000 triples were ever constructed. The Honda Goldwing. Honda's Goldwing is synonymous with America, and in fact many of the earlier models were actually built there, until quite recently as a matter of fact. The bike was developed because Honda realised that their 754 wasn't actually proving that popular in the US market for long distance riders. And while the 750 was a massive sales success, they couldn't help but notice that for the transcontinental travellers, bikes such as BMWs, Gutsys and Harley's big cruisers were still selling very well. And given that Honda is a company that likes to be involved in every aspect of the motorcycle market, it wasn't long before they put the development of the Goldwing in place. And somewhat surprisingly, the first prototypes featured a 6-cylinder engine, something which would not be fitted to Goldwings on the road for many years yet. But 1974 would see the unveiling of the first flat 4 Goldwing, with its 1000cc engine, featuring an overhead cam and shaft final drive. And also a first for any Honda, and indeed any Japanese 4-stroke, it was liquid cooled. The first generation was an instant sales success, and although rather on the heavy side, these machines run a very low centre of gravity, so are much more nimble than you might think. This was replaced by an 1100cc model which generally just had a lot more torque, although peak performance was very similar. The 1100 Series 2 engines ran into the mid-80s, and were the first Goldwings to feature extensive bodywork, and of course an extensive range of gadgets too. However, by 1983 the Goldwing's dominance was being challenged by the Yamaha Venture with its V4 engine. Their response would be the 1984 GL1200, the last of Honda's 4-cylinder Goldwings. The GL1200 weighed in at a not insubstantial 330 kilos or 728 pounds. but forcing that flat engine means that the weight is mounted low, a fact helped by the 22 litre tank being mounted under the seat. The flat 4 engine was of 1182cc with a boring stroke of 75.5 by 66. Compression ratio was 9:1 and peak power was a claimed 94 horsepower. 1985 would see the model gain fuel injection, but that would pretty much be it for the gold wing 4-cylinder, as the all-new 6 was waiting in the wings. Harley's Cruisers. For some of us, the seating positions on Harleys don't make a lot of sense. Arse near the ground, hands in the air and feet way out in front. But for some it's perfect. I guess it takes all sorts. But the fact is, Harley's big lazy motor is ideal for crossing continents. It's understressed and indeed transmits that stress-free attitude to the rider. And while it's true that many of the 70s machines if pushed hard could vibrate horrendously, still within their parameters and the engine performs very well indeed. Basically they'll just chug on from coast to coast. In 1984, Harley's old shovelhead engine was replaced by the new Evo or blockhead motor, and this represented a substantial upgrade of Harley's traditional 45-degree Big V twins, featuring a new all-aluminium top end, which was designed to be simple and therefore less expensive to manufacture. And with its 1340cc displacement, the engine was considerably more refined than the previous generation, and indeed it would be one of Harley-Davidson's most popular engines, running through until 1999 when it was replaced by the twin cam. The Motor Gutsy, California. There's no doubt that it was a major coup for Motor Gutsy when the Los Angeles Police Department purchased some of their V7 models for use on the highway patrol. And when it came to replacing these bikes in '71, they once again turned to Motor Gutsy, who had worked with the highway patrol to develop a machine specifically for the role. And the resulting machine represented a considerable upgrade. It featured the new Tonti frame, which was lighter and more rigid than that previously used, and featured a revised engine taken out to 850cc. Compared to the outgoing V7, the new machine was more powerful, lighter, and handled much better with superior ground clearance. The 850 Cali features an 844cc engine with a boring stroke of 83 by 78. Compression ratio was 9.5:1, and peak power was a claimed 68.5 horsepower at 7,000 RPM. The overhead valve V-twin engine featured 5 speeds and shaft drive of course, and while early machines would use twin leading shoe front brakes, the later models used discs all round with Gutsy's patented link brake system. The Cali would prove very popular and would be a stalwart of Gutsy's range right through until the early 2000s, albeit through various iterations, with the original 850 engine growing to 1000cc and eventually 1100cc, before this engine was in turn replaced by an all-new, heavily revised 1400cc unit, production of which would run through until 2021, making it, for the moment at least, the final iteration of Gutsy's classic California. The BMW R Series. Originally a manufacturer of aviation engines, BMW's motorcycles trace all the way back to 1923 and the original R32. The power unit for the R32 had originally been designed as a portable power unit. However, when BMW found that other companies were using the engine to power motorcycles, they reasoned they could do a better job themselves and began production of their own motorcycle. And while their engine would evolve fairly slowly, eventually gaining overhead valves in the 1930s, BMW would innovate greatly elsewhere. Experimenting with superchargers and hydraulically damped telescopic forks in racing, the latter being applied to their road machines in the late 30s, they would also make use of concepts developed outside of the factory, such as Earl's forks in the 1950s, and in the 1970s would popularise the use of aerodynamically designed full fairings on their touring and sports touring machines. In the early 80s, BMW would attempt to replace the flat twins with the all-new K-series range of inline fours. But such was the popularity of the boxers that BMW would find themselves reintroducing many deleted models, and were going to replace the airheads with an all-new range of boxers featuring oil cooling and 4 valves per cylinder, and a rather novel suspension system at the front too. Whatever bikes or collections of bikes would you like to see us cover in a future video? Maybe you've got a bike we can use for a test ride. Either way, get in touch below. Hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe, and of course, Thank you very much for watching.